obviously always reach out to me if you have an additional question that is on your mind. So with no further ado, I think the first thing we're going to do is understand who's on the call. So the first place we're going to start is a poll. And if you wouldn't mind, we're going to bring up the poll question. How familiar are you with the family office concept? Choice A, I have a family office with dedicated staff. Second bullet, my family business is my family office. Third, I am a client of a multifamily office. Fourth, I'd like to start a family office, or I'm a professional advisor providing family office services. Or if you're a professional advisor to families, maybe not necessarily to doing family office services, but legal, tax, accounting. There's so many different possible services you may be providing affluent families, family businesses, etc. So take a minute, and we're going to just let you respond to the poll, and this will help us get a sense of who's all on the call. And Ryan, when you see that we've gotten a good amount of participation, I'll let you bring up the results. Okay. Here they are. So we see, so my family business is my family office, and I'd like to start a family office. Well, good. Those are both good demographics to be on for this call. And I see about 10% have a dedicated family office. You might have been able to answer multiple. You might have a family business. You might have a family office. So this is really, really helpful to see that nearly 40% of the folks on this call have an interest in the family office concept and possibly starting one. And then we've obviously got a good showing of family businesses who are functioning, supporting their family offices, or family members around family office services, as well as professionals on the call. So jumping into the content, how do we define the concept of a family office? Well, the wealth management industry has it loosely defined as basically an organization that's dedicated to serving individuals, family members, on a whole range of areas, from financial and estate, tax, to accounting, to financial planning, to capital sufficiency, investment management, and so forth. So there's a long list of potential areas that a family office may be dedicated to supporting an individual or individual and family members around. And the simplest way I think about it is when the business of the family becomes really the wealth, management of the family. And so the interesting nuance is that where the operating business may have been the focal point, now the wealth becomes the focal point, and then the different business operations may be almost like investments related to the overall family office design. Family Office Exchange sort of has a slightly different lens, and they talk about family office as it relates to helping families preserve 4 dimensions. And they talk about first the business legacy, and that really entails where the wealth originated, sort of the backstory of the family enterprise, and then the financial legacy has to do more with where the financial security, the financial management of the wealth and how things are maintained. And then the family legacy, where the family comes from and where they are headed, and sort of where they're trying to get to. And then finally, this idea of a philanthropic legacy, what's the lasting contribution from the family? How are they giving back? What do their charitable experts say about who they are and how they want to be known? And so those sort of 4 legacy dimensions is another way that Family Office Exchange looks at defining the family office. Now, if we go to the next slide, a multifamily office is another paradigm of the family office universe. And there are a number of differences between single-family offices, multifamily offices, but the biggest one is that the multifamily office footprint is set up typically to be a commercial enterprise, where it's really there to make money, to create wealth for its shareholders and its stakeholders. And it typically provides services for several different families. A single-family office, someone might say, but Kirby, the single-family office can provide services for several families. That's correct, but they usually are all connected in some way by bloodline. In a few exceptions, certain key executives may be allowed to invest alongside a single family office. In the multifamily office case, on the other hand, it's typically an amalgamation of many unrelated families that are being serviced through a commercial enterprise. And there's many MFOs, that's sort of the nomenclature acronym for multifamily office, that may be aligned with a bank or owned by a bank. Those examples would be examples like Ascent, Abbott Downing, Hawthorne, Genspring. Those are all family offices that are actually within, owned and operated by a larger banking institution. Then there are smaller multifamily offices that are more set up to be independent but scale the number of families that it serves from one single family to multiple families, and they range in size from 500-600 million on the small end to 5-6 billion, and sort of that range, and as opposed to the bank MFOs, which might be 20, 30, 60 or more billion under management. So very different in terms of size between an institutional MFO, a boutique MFO. And then at the bottom, I mentioned outsourced CIOs, that's Chief Investment Officer. And so there's several family offices that really are actually really only geared towards providing investment-only services. And so Gray Court, Altair Advisors, there's a few others that are examples of really providing deep expertise that is very targeted only around the investment advisory piece. And that's a growing area of interest and demand. Okay, let's jump into the purpose of the family office. There are so many different goals typical of a family office, and a lot of the goals center around business ownership and control, especially we had several of you indicate that you're part of an operating business or your family business may operate like a family office. And I see there's a question. I just want to make sure if I missed any of these. Okay, related branch is completely different family. So I did answer the question about the multifamily office typically does not have related family members. It's typically different family members. And as it relates to, the question came in, are they managing the business's money or the shareholders' money? So typically they're managing the shareholders' money. In certain cases, businesses may have commercial accounts or business accounts through, but not typically in a multifamily office. It's usually in another sort of a setup through a bank or financial advisory firm or investment advisory firm. So those two questions came in. Thanks so much. I didn't want to miss answering those before I moved on here too far. So coming back to this slide and talking about the purpose of the family office, there's this wheel provides several different areas that may be important to a family. And so for many families, the family business or the primary enterprise or enterprises is an important aspect that has ongoing management and responsibilities and certainly governance and control issues. And so part of that is how do we start to organize those business interests in conjunction with liquid assets and also the family capital or who those family members are. And so that's a big part of how the family office may operate is minding and overseeing issues related to succession planning, capital financing, dividend funding, effective management of the businesses becomes critical and can actually consume a tremendous amount of the owner's time. And so the family office can start to offload some of that and some of those responsibilities. The other sort of areas that I think are really critical is wealth preservation and growth. There's sort of this toggle where the family office needs to preserve what was already created, but also needs to think about how to augment and grow wealth and think about opportunities for sustaining it in terms of sustaining the purchasing power of the family and sort of overcoming the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves paradigm, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in the family business literature. So financial security is another key piece of how the family office gets oriented, and I can talk a lot more about these sort of different areas if I had a much longer webinar, but I think you start to see the sort of continuity of primary objectives around financial security, creating continuity for the family, alignment of interests, and certainly philanthropy becomes another area that the family office is usually very active in terms of working with the family. So if we jump to the next slide, we look at some of the different roles, and this is a cartoon that comes from the book, which starts to show some of the different hats that the family office may provide. There's a tremendous amount of decision-making that the family office is party to. So they're oftentimes a consigliere to the family in terms of different decisions, from trust decisions, wealth transfer decisions, to liquidity issues, to tax planning. So there's a whole host of governance requirements in that executor role that the family office plays. They're oftentimes the keeper of tremendous amount of information, from things like food allergies to births and deaths and marriage certificates and trust documentation, and keepers of codes and security access codes to estates and so forth, not just account numbers. They're a guardian. They oftentimes block and tackle for the family. So the best way I like to think about it is Michael Orr. If you ever saw the movie The Blind Side, imagine someone protecting the quarterback. Well, that's oftentimes what the family office is doing for the family. They're sort of trying to block and tackle a whole number of folks who may want access information, or unsavory types who are looking to take advantage of. They're a brain trust. They have tremendous amount of thinking power along the decision making that's made, not just 1 year, 5 years, but potentially over decades. So they have tremendous knowledge and a capacity to share that information. And then at the same time, they're a confidant. They oftentimes really are the most trusted private counselor to the key family leaders and their offspring. And so they provide an important amount of safety and security around some of the most treasured aspects of the family, who they are, what they own, and the keepers of their dreams in many respects. So again, there's a bigger discussion in the book around this, but that's sort of at a high level. There are so many different realities of families with wealth. In the next slide, we see the family footprint, and that usually starts with one nuclear family that expands over the second, in subsequent generations. And thanks, because we live so long, what starts off as lifestyle planning or and so the realities of the families is that the issues are not linear. They're in the macro world, from a 2008 scenario where we had a drastic contraction in our markets, which again really shifted people's mindsets about how they lived, what they were saving for, how their preferences around risk. And so it's a fluid and dynamic reality with these families of wealth, where all of these are, and there are more issues that aren't on this slide here, become really critical, from really looking at holdings and asset allocation and investment management, to a whole number of issues around wealth transfer, preparing the next generation, issues around trustees and beneficiaries and their roles and responsibilities, and what that family really wants them to do, to even mundane things about bill pay, and do we have enough in our checking account to pay for our electric bill and multiple properties, for example. So there's this whole complexity around families of wealth that is as a broader family issue, but then then you drill down to the individual level needs, and they can vary dramatically. I've worked with families who have kids with special needs, and so they think very differently about wealth transfer planning, as it relates to a child that has the means to go out and get a job and be self-sufficient versus a child that doesn't have the capacity to do that and will need support ongoing, throughout their childhood and adult and later years, will need much more care than some of their other children. So the realities of wealth are fantastically complex and varied. There's no family that has an identical footprint to the next. And with that said, when we jump to the next slide, looking at different pathways, there's so many different pathways to a family office. And I think one of the realities that became very apparent in researching the book was that the source of wealth has a lot to do with how we think about that wealth or that enterprise. And so, for many of the entrepreneurs and wealth creators I interviewed, there was over 60 family offices and executives I interviewed for the book. It became clear that those, for example, on the investment front, had a much different network and different drive and different interest in the role they wanted to play in the family office that they created than, say, a family that created tremendous wealth in a manufacturing or footprint, or possibly a totally non-investment related area. And so, the bar was a lot higher for those families to get up to speed and to really think about what they wanted to create and what it was going to look like, versus many of the investment family offices I've seen are really almost like a transition from the operating business, be it a hedge fund or some other investment-oriented business, to now being a family office. Some of that was driven by Dodd-Frank and the family office exemption, and that's some of the regulatory oversight of that governs the way the family offices operate. So it's more attractive for some of the George Soros of the world, Carl Icahns of the world, to shift from being a hedge fund to being a single family office. But by and large, that didn't influence, I think, the mass majority of family offices about how they were set up and created. But back to the pathways to a family office, one of the most common is actually right through the operating business. And so many of you indicated that you have an operating business. And so I would say you're probably the super majority of how family offices are created. And I know in my family, much of the family office-related services were very much handled for many, many years, many decades, through the family business. And it wasn't really until things got more complex that I've witnessed personally and then professionally that families sort of see a need for a separation and of roles and responsibilities. In the book, I talk at great length about some of the challenges that families face, I should say family business employees face, when they have two masters. They have their day-to-day job in the family business, and then they're also have side responsibilities, be it from admin to wires to trust disbursements to just knowing about account information. And so sometimes having those two masters can put them at odds and conflict. So there's actually several good pieces of literature out there I'm happy to share with you that talk about the merits and the opportunities of actually separating the family business from the family office. Sudden wealth is one that doesn't happen very often. It's probably more one-off. It's marriage settlements, a sudden IPO, a massive windfall or liquidity event. It happens not typically in the lottery winning kind of way, but maybe through a sale of a big business. And sudden wealth can be a really dramatic impact to the family business or family members as it relates to how they orient themselves, because now they have the ability and the means to do so many different things that perhaps they weren't able to do when much of the wealth was liquid or illiquid, caught in the privately held business. And so if we look to the next slide on the spectrum of family office services, I think about this triangle is almost like a paradigm where now you're looking through and you're having to think about the family wealth as it relates to family assets, what's collectively shared and owned by the family, and these are just some of the considerations under that. And then there's the personal level, where family members are really having to think about what is it to their personal individual lifestyle, their cash flow needs, their taxes, where do they live, and so forth, that have to be dealt with. And then, again, back to this legacy around philanthropy, there's oftentimes shared philanthropic assets that the family has to negotiate, govern, and decide where they're meant to be, where they want them to go, what's the mission, vision, values around the family that sort of augment the opportunities for those assets. And so those are sort of, at a high level, again, sort of the different areas on the wealth spectrum that families are going to have to think about, this family level, on this individual level, and then, again, for those assets that are sort of beyond the familial or the personal, that will be, bridge generations. Those assets have a big role to play. And so, how does this translate into the different types of family offices that may exist? And I want to talk you through a few different types that I discuss in the book. And for the purposes of this webinar, I wanted to put it onto sort of a scale to give you a sense of where do they map out. And, the family has several different lives in terms of stages and ages on that y-axis. And so when we look at stages, there may be different transitions that they're going through. For example, in going from the individual to being married, going from being married to having children, going from having children to having grandchildren, and then multiple generations. So we both have ages of individuals that need the consideration, and then ages of the actual big, broader family footprint where you might have 2, 3 generations potentially living at one time, and the family office has to think about those needs. And then we think about the complexity and scale in terms of what are the holdings, how are they oriented, how are they organized, and what's the goal and directive of the family office. And so this is where we kind of jump into different archetypes. And the first one I want to talk about is the founder family office, which is a very common place that family offices start, where we have a family member, a mother or father who's had a successful business or had some successful career that's generated significant wealth. And so this becomes almost like the second coming of their career in terms of where they want, they sort of unplug from maybe the operating business and really want to focus a lot of their time around managing the wealth and become very integral to the operation, the leadership, the strategy and deployment of the family office. And so it's very founder-focused in terms of their world and how they're setting up things for future generations, and it's definitely at that sort of G1 stage. The next sort of family office I want to talk about is administrative and compliance. Now, this family office won't probably handle things like investment oversight. They may not have as much activity around family business. They may be more like a coordinator family office in terms of coordinating a lot of documentation, tax time, wires. They may be housing a tremendous amount of information. And so, this type of family office is less geared on being full service and more geared on, making sure that forms are submitted at the appropriate time, and, a repository for K-1s, for example, and making sure that, folks have health care, have health coverage and so forth. I mean, these are the types of services that they may be providing, and they may not have, a full suite of services. So again, the complexity is usually not as high, and it's not as, doesn't have to be a tremendous scale of wealth. The next family office is really around legacy and philanthropy. There's a lot of families who decide they don't really want their family office focused on investment advisory, but this legacy, hence why it's more north on the family stage and age, this might be really the focal point, and several family offices I interviewed for the book found that they wanted a gathering place for their foundation or foundations. There's many families I interviewed that had several foundations, had donor-advised funds, and had other involvement in community foundations. And so this became their central place to administer, manage, govern, and sort of organize the continuity as it related to philanthropic efforts and the family's legacy. But again, not full service, not walking your dog, not thinking about, say, financial planning as much. And so, again, high up on the family stage and age, but not necessarily super complex or super geared to a very scaled family office. The next one I want to focus on is the family business-focused family office. It sounds like many of the folks on this call probably are seeing that operate within their, within their family right now. But the family office embedded in the family business is fairly common. And then I've also seen a lot of folks who, what I call family business or family office through the back door, where they don't actually know that they have a family office, and then all of a sudden they realize that they're performing all these duties and tasks that are very family office oriented, and sort of seeing, oh gosh, this really has the merit to stand on its own. So the family business oriented family office is usually looking at liquid and illiquid types of issues, a complex governance system intermingled between the privately held business and then the family governance that may be oriented to the family wealth, and the interplay between corporate philanthropy and individual and family philanthropy. And so there's a duality around this office where the family business still is a cornerstone or a centerpiece to the family entities, and so that's why it's still, really, the focal point of the family office. The final two areas that I'll talk about is the investment family office and the multi-generational family office. And what really distinguishes the two is that the fact that most family offices that have an investment focus have scaled themselves to a place where the wealth really warrants the direct oversight of an in-house investment team. And the difference really between investment and multi-generational on many levels is the fact that there's a greater degree of complexity as more family individuals and family sub-families are online in a multi-generational. So, you might be looking at account management for 200 to 300 or more trusts in a multi-generational family office. You might have much more complex liquidity needs. You might have much more varying direction and oversight to financial planning and capital sufficiency at the individual and individual family level, whereas the investment family office is typically really deep and strong and technical on the investment front, but maybe does not provide the whole gamut of services that a multi-generational family office may be providing. And so, they may be very oriented towards the risk parameters, the asset allocation, investment policy statements, et cetera. And some of that may be very critical as well in the multi-generational, but the multi-generational oftentimes has a lens on leadership development, succession planning, wealth transfer planning, gift and tax planning, liquidity needs. And so all of those elements have a much stronger synthesis for the continuity planning that goes on in the multi-generational family office. So this is a very, very quick overview of these family offices. Again, much more in the book that can give you more insight. But as you're just hearing me talk at a high level, and of course I'm sure you'll do more due diligence on these different archetypes later, we wanted to jump in and do a poll with you just to ascertain what your interest is around some of these different concepts. And again, some of them may apply, may not apply. We were only able to give you 5 choices, and so for some of you, they may not apply, but we've tried to pick the ones that we thought had the most application. So what type of family office would be the best fit for your family. And again, the first one is multi-generational. The second one is the investment-focused family office. The third is the family business-centered family office. The fourth is that legacy and philanthropic family office. And if you're a professional advisor, maybe none of these apply, or maybe they do apply, and you want to select one that you see you work most closely with families around. So I'm going to give everyone a minute to select on the call, and then when Ryan sees that we have fairly decent participation, we'll show you the results. Okay, so this is fantastic. So the bulk of you really are multi-generational or family business centered, and fewer of you are the investment or legacy focused. And so, you know, this is very common. So again, I think this reiterates a little bit what we learned about you, why you're interested in the family office concept from the initial poll question. And so, with that said, you know, I'm going to probably lean my comments somewhat more towards the multi-generational and family business-centered issues. I won't forget about you, legacy and investment folks either, but this is helpful as I give you some more insights into some of the key findings from writing the book. But let's jump over and talk about what some of the strengths and weaknesses. And again, the ability to talk to so many different families from around the globe. I had the tremendous privilege of talking to families in everywhere from Australia and Israel to, you know, Luxembourg and London and, you know, Europe and Asia, certainly all over the United States and several in South and Central America and Canada. And so, you know, there are a lot of universal sort of themes that came out of the strengths and weaknesses. And so this is a SWOT analysis from the book that I thought would be helpful for this webinar today to talk about, you know, where we saw families gravitate when they thought about, was the single family office right for them versus possibly being part of a multi-family office. And so control, customization and dedicated services, and also the privacy, I think were definitely the top drivers of what drew families to want to create their own family office footprint. And there are a lot of opportunities thanks to the leveling playing field of the investment world today about getting information, opportunities for co-investment. There's a lot more collaboration and sharing. There's so much more peer-to-peer exchange that goes on. I know there's some folks in the Chicago area that indicated that they regularly met a very private group of single-family offices to share best practices and ideas, and to also source, you know, potentially deal flow, or also, you know, advisors or consultants in certain specific areas. Now, the challenges for the single-family office are pervasive, again, across cultures, and talent is a big challenge for a lot of family offices, is just being able to attract and retain them, because there is no real career path in a family office. You're typically hired in, and you're sort of filling a hole in their footprint that they're looking to attract. And so there isn't necessarily a job track for many family office professionals unless you're in a much, much bigger scaled operation. You know, because you're doing everything one-off oftentimes in a single family office, it's hard to get the scale and the efficiency down. And then, you know, the continuity in a family office setting can be challenging if not everyone is on the same page or sees the same sense of urgency around certain issues, or really if there's apathy and there's just lack of interest to participate. And so, you know, really being prudent about what the family office should do, not do, how engaged or involved, you know, its family members are, has a lot to do with its success. And then generational mathematics, and that's really just the increasing number of family members to the pot of wealth. And so even though the family office may be doing an excellent job preserving or growing it incrementally based on the risk tolerance of the family, it's oftentimes difficult to keep pace with the number of next gen being born. So if we move on to the multifamily office, again, I talked about the multifamily office as this commercial enterprise, and there's some tremendous benefits that the multifamily office gets than the single-family office. First off, scale. Oftentimes they're dealing with, not one bloodline-related family, but they're learning from, maybe 20, 30, 50. In the commercial family offices, it's not unusual to have 100, 200, or 300 families, unrelated, that are all, under the umbrella of the multifamily office. So they can start to build some, best practices, some streamlined, efficiencies that the single-family office may not be able to. And they also can integrate a lot of the learnings from, client ABCD into JK and L. So they have the ability to attract top talent, to retain them and incent them properly. And so there's a lot of different opportunities in the multifamily office that are almost contrary to the single-family office. There's also the ability that it can be more cost-effective to the end user because they're able to scale certain services across many, many more family members, and can, be almost like a buffet where you can pick and choose the services that you want, the managers, the styles, et cetera. Now, the challenges of the multifamily office market is pretty severe, too. I mean, the challenges are things like the client advisor load. There's oftentimes varying influxes of new clients and exoduses of clients, and so, it is a commercial enterprise. So sometimes your advisor may be overtaxed with 10 new families, or may be concerned that they will have a job if the multifamily office is in trouble. Sometimes there's institutional groupthink where, they're not as, open to new ideas coming in because they have their process, their approach. Other challenges are getting too big too fast, or leadership turnover, and talent retention, and not being able to hold on because talent becomes in such high demand. And certainly ownership and leadership alignment, I think, between whoever owns the multifamily office and who's running it, if hopefully they're the same, but not always is that the case. And then how that corporate culture impacts the delivery of the services. So again, I know I'm going through these relatively quickly, but there's so much I want to get to before I take your questions. So let's jump to another poll question really quickly here, and think about some key family wealth considerations. What do you think is the most important factor to consider when managing your family's wealth? Is it the control and privacy? Is it having dedicated staff and service? Are you more focused on comprehensive services and a breadth of resources? Are you looking to decentralize the wealth management through a number of outsourced providers, and maybe where you're coordinating it? Is cost, looking for the best, the lowest cost, most important to you? So think about these and just, select the top one. We know you might have a couple that you would select. And Ryan's going to go through and see what our results are here. Okay, shall we close out the poll and see the results? So interesting. We have about an even split between control and privacy and comprehensive service and breadth of resources. So this is really interesting. And no one's going for the low shop, the lower cost, or what I would call the Walmart approach to family office services, where you're trying to get the least, the most amount for the least amount of cost. So this is really helpful. So what I'm sort of seeing here is that there may be some of you that probably want to look at certain multifamily offices and their sort of footprint and how they operate, because they may provide you some great insights to the different service offerings, the cost associated with the different service offerings. And oftentimes, I want to be clear that single-family offices are oftentimes clients of multifamily offices where they don't want to, say, have a governance specialist on staff, but they will work with an institutional family office or a boutique family office who can help fill the gaps where they may not want a dedicated staff member. So, there may be some of you who experienced this or are considering this, and if you are considering it, you're not alone. So I've definitely worked with families who go through the RFP process and talk to multifamily offices to explore who can provide one-off some of the best services for them. And then certainly those leaning towards the control and privacy, you're probably best suited to think about that single-family office footprint and how you want to structure and set it up. So I wanted to run through some takeaways from the book, and I know we have sort of a finite amount of time here, so I apologize in advance because my remarks may be a little bit brief, but I also want to leave a few minutes at the end for some questions. So the first one to talk about is just the lack of consensus and standard. And I want to affirm you, if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. Just like if you've seen one family business, you've seen one family business. The snowflake analogy applies. Snow may all look like snow at a distance, but when you get up close, you see that everyone has its unique design and structure and organization. And so that's really very germane to the family office discussion, as that's the reality. And as much as I would love to say, there's this these are the defining principles, much of it has to do with the eye of the beholder. So do you see yourself as a family office? Would you select in and say, yes, I am? Or maybe you're a family business that has to manage a lot of family office services, and no, I don't really think we're a family office. So again, it's really up to you, and there is no precise definition or wrong way. And so there's no wrong way to be a family office, and there's no wrong way to becoming a family office. So that's just something I learned from talking to so many. And then the next slide, the reality is it's super complex, and no one's given a roadmap to most folks. Just like having a child, it doesn't come out of the womb with a manual that says this is what you need to expect in the first few days versus the first few weeks, a few months, and a few years. The family has to orient itself to what I'll call triage issues, things that they really need to take care of right away. And in the book, there's a chapter talking about developing a family office baseline. So there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that the family needs to get comfortable with, and then start to organize and orient, okay, how does this all fit together? Where can we leverage, that we've got 20 trusts here, or are there investment managers that may be appropriate for us to consider on these other investment pieces? So it is confusing and it is puzzling at times, but I think at the same time, the family office can really help to ascertain, sort, prioritize, clarify, and build out an action plan for family members so that it is not so complex. The next slide I talk about is, the reality of the important role that families play in the family office. Just like the family business, there are so many family members involved in the day-to-day operations, management, and leadership of the family office. So families at the helm is a reality. So I love this cartoon that we had created for the book, because the SSFS family bounty is a great metaphor for how a family member may be trying to orient. And little Billy may get whacked by the boom if we come around too quickly, and we might lose some of that martini on the back of the bow, or champagne, I'm not sure what it is. And then there's some folks, squabbling in the galley and others taking a nap. But everyone may be at a different place as it relates to the family wealth and the family business, yet you're all moving in some collective direction. Interestingly, about 7 out of 10 family members, 7 out of 10 individuals in a leadership capacity in the family office are family members. About 1 in 6 are the chief investment officers. So back to that wearing many hats, it's oftentimes challenging for family office executives and family members in those roles to play the brother, the mother, the father, sister, as well as the trustee or the beneficiary, the grantor, the foundation executive, and so forth. So there's a lot of different skills that have to be brought to bear, and there's a lot of roles that may be at conflict with one another. So family at the helm is a really important theme in the book that gets discussed, obviously, in much greater length. The next slide, I talk about how the family office is a different animal. You know, the reality is they oftentimes are the scale and size, potentially, of larger type institutional investors, pension funds, or endowments, but we don't have the liquidity restraints, oftentimes the reporting requirements. We don't have a lot of the hurdles of having a public stakeholder group, and so there can be a higher degree of patient capital towards the lifestyle goals or the legacy goals of the family. And ultimately, if the family office does have a proclivity towards investing, those are the two primary areas that need to be solved for. You know, the lifestyle needs of individual family members, as well as establishing some sort of understanding and expectation of, you know, what is the family office there to supplement, and then also those legacy aspirations if the family members have those. So again, a quick graphic from the book that kind of helps you size down and really get focused on the investment orientation of the family office. One of my favorite cartoons is the next one, and it relates to the next generation, which is really the family office elephant in the room. And so, you know, this slide reads, "This may come as a bit of a shock, but you are terminally wealthy." And so I love this graphic because I think this is absolutely the wrong way to bring down the news of entitleitis, because it's almost manifest destiny in this sort of situation. And so one of the things I counsel and talk a lot about is the importance of recognizing that family has the power to control the message, set the expectation, and adequately prepare the next generation at different ages and different stages. So age appropriately, you can message the behaviors and the responsibilities without indulging the next generation. And a really great insight came out recently at a conference I was at, where the idea was brought up that it's not that they're not engaged, it's that we have to also meet them halfway, and we have to see this world through their eyes to really help them get a sense of what it's going to mean to them, and the expectation and the co-creation of the future legacy of that wealth, and the stewardship principles that we want embedded in it. You know, if we focus on the valuables versus the values, if we put a greater emphasis on the materialism versus the self-worth of these individuals, then, you know, a lot of these next generational family members don't develop the capacity to fail. They don't develop the capacity to be autonomous and healthy self-esteem. And so, you know, entitlement is a big concern by so many family office executives and members, but I do think there's real good practical ways that it can be addressed and thwarted to build that healthy relationship to that wealth. So the final slide here before we jump to questions is actually the cover of the book, and Jean-Paul Getty actually designed these beautiful gardens outside of LA. I love the representation of these gardens. To me, they provide the perfect metaphor for the art and science of the family office. You know, those bushes did not grow into those beautiful concentric interwoven circles. They were pristinely manicured and you know, developed to grow that way. And there's a lot that has to do with reflecting and being at a distance, and those gardens actually float in some reflective pools. So, you know, again, there's quite high barriers around those beautiful gardens, but they could not exist without a lot of human intervention and dedicated service to crafting them in that way, shape, and fashion. Those gardens actually, that's a beautiful picture in the summer months, but they turn a vibrant red in the fall, and then they're quite barren, obviously, in the winter. So the seasonality of families is another piece around the family office that they have to sort of anticipate the transitions, the life events, and so forth. So I thought that the Getty Gardens, and Jean-Paul Getty was I think, the 67th wealthiest oil tycoon in the 60s. And so, you know, it was fitting that that image became the book of the cover, or cover of the book, excuse me. So I've left 5 minutes for questions. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. I don't see any at this point in the chat log, but if you've sent questions to Ryan, I'm more than welcome to field them and appreciate your attention on this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Kirby. We did get some questions that came in, so I'm actually going to read them out loud to you.
Okay.
And then you can field them. So one question that came in was, is there a round number, an asset value, that best denotes SFO versus MFO? And the person that asked the question said, I've heard that 100 million for SFO and less than 50 for MFO, but is that not necessarily a good rule of thumb?
That's a great question. So let's be honest. I mean, I worked in a multifamily office, so I know that side of the equation quite well, and then I have family members who have a single-family office. Account sizes oftentimes can be as small as $5 and $10 million in a multifamily office. So a lot of these multifamily offices target the $25 to $50 million net worth family, but you may be that size family and only have $10 million with a multifamily office. So I'm giving you the insight that most of those MFOs don't want to tell you. They certainly would love to have all 50 million or 100 million of your assets. But account size is very different than net worth, and that's just one thing to consider. With that said, it's much more costly to be a multifamily office client with $10 million than it is $50 million. Oftentimes it's assets under management fee, and it's on a scale, and I'm just going to give you a rough number. It might be 85 bips or basis points if you're coming in as a $10 or $15 million client, and it might slide down to 20 basis points if you're a $150 million client. Sort of in that range. Now, a single-family office, I had coordinator family offices where it's really like a family member and a bookkeeper and maybe an outside accountant that might have a much smaller degree of personal assets, maybe 25, maybe 50 million, but they don't have the overhead, which is by just for your information, the most expensive piece of the cost structure for a family office. So many of the experts I talk to wouldn't advise a family office to set one up to multi-generational wise for under probably 200 million or even 250 million. And really, investment, if you're going to be an investment-only family office, it might be well north of that. So again, it depends on what you want to offer, how complex a structure you want to create, and what the cost of privacy is to you. I mean, what are you willing to pay? Because, you can get a lot done with a fairly lean structure and outsourcing quite a bit of it.
Thank you. So another question that came in, I'm actually going to send this to you, but I'll read it out loud for everyone, is on multifamily offices, is there any primary reason for exiting a relationship that is determined by exit interviews out of that list of weaknesses? This is in regards to the SWOT analysis slide that you talked about earlier on.
Okay, so maybe we can bring that
Sure.
SWOT analysis slide, so weaknesses. Reasons for exiting. So if I'm getting this, primary reasons for leaving an MFO, determined by exit interviews out of that list of weaknesses. So I'm assuming you mean leaving the MFO, what are the reasons that you might, that would lead you to want to pull the cord and depart. I think the one that I would keep my eye on is the level of service. So the client advisor load is really important because if you can't get a hold of your advisor or you're not able to get responses, timely responses, I mean, so much of the investment world has gates and timelines and deadlines, and so getting real-time actionable feedback is a critical piece of the service. And so if your advisor is too loaded down with clients, or there's another thing that happens, they load in junior advisors that come on board, and they say, oh, well, now little, not little, but Stevie and Sally are also going to be on your advisory team. And you notice that they don't have the same pedigree or they don't have the same experience. Those, to me, are all flags. Or if you've seen that you've been passed from advisor to advisor to advisor over a relatively short amount of time, those are flags to me that would say I would reassess whether or not you're getting the service that you need. And the institutional service offering note is another one where you want to make sure that they're not putting you into a box out of convenience for the sort of the top-down mentality that can sometimes perpetuate, that they're able to customize to what you need them to do. And I always am a big fan of, challenging them to make sure they understand your view, how you want to be invested, and if they're too narrowly defined and trying to put you into a box, it may not be the right fit for you. Or if you feel that they're pitching you product, or maybe there may be a conflict of interest. So really understanding how they get paid. It's not in that weakness, but it could be a threat if you see there's sort of changing ways that they're getting compensated, for how you're investing. I hope that answered the question. If not, pop me an email. We can talk about it further.
Thanks. I know it's 2 o'clock. Do you have time for one more question?
I do, and if you need to drop off the call, no problem. We appreciate you attending today. Go ahead.
Everyone. So last question, is the cost of a family office usually allocated to those benefiting on an ownership percentage basis?
This is a fantastic question. So the cost may be borne in a whole number of different fashions. I've seen it, shared among, family office, who owns the family office, as you described. I've also seen it allocated at different levels to different generations. So, for example, different generations of owners may decide they want to take on more or less. There may be ownership across different generations, but say G3 is paying a much thinner level of costs than, say, G2 or G1, and so they actually want G1 to pay more of it for a number of reasons. It might be estate rationale. It might be operator. Maybe they are owners and operators, and I've also seen where, actually back to the leadership slide, several folks who are, say over 55 or 60, do not take a salary or do not take any sort of compensation because they want to, not grow their wealth. They're thinking about, multi-generational wealth transfer. So the cost of the family office may be allocated differently depending on ownership and also based on service. So if one family branch is requiring a lot more time and attention on, say, estate planning, obviously they would be allocated a higher cost overlay for that than a family member or family group that isn't, say, having any of those services administered. So, I've seen it definitely by ownership, but also by level of service required. And then at some level, the family has to decide, well, do we need to keep providing these services, or do we need to, move to an outsourced model for some of those things? So that also impacts the cost structure, insourcing versus outsourcing.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thanks again, Kirby, for speaking with us today and sharing with everyone your expertise on family offices. This was a really wonderful broadcast. Thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and again, feel free to reach out if there are questions that we didn't get addressed, or if you need help in thinking about how your family office creation needs to take place, and I'm happy to be a conduit or resource or potentially an advisor or consultant to you in that process. And I also want to thank, I know there's several folks, I think, on the call who may have been a part of the Family Office Handbook creation. So a shout out, I won't name names because many of you are anonymous in your contributions for the book. But again, just want to thank Loyola and everyone who is on the call today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. I wanted to let also our audience know that we're going to be sending out a link to download a PDF of the slides today, so keep a lookout for that. We're also going to be drawing names at random to give away 10 copies, signed copies, of Kirby's book. So if we draw your name and you're a winner, we'll be contacting you. And like Kirby said, if you have any other questions about family offices, please feel free to reach out to her. You can reach out to the Family Business Center. And hopefully we can keep the conversation going. Thanks again to Kirby and our audience today for listening. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.